The president of the HOA actually called the sheriff on me for swimming in the lake in my own backyard, a lake that had been in my family long before her subdivision even existed. Picture it, I'm floating quietly at sunset, the loons calling across the water, when suddenly sirens slice through the evening air, shattering the peace. A patrol car crunches up my gravel driveway, and out steps Deputy Martinez, looking just as puzzled as I was. "Sir, I've been told I have to issue you a citation," HOA complained, he says, trying not to laugh. And there she is, Karen Whitmire, standing smugly at my property line, arms crossed, wearing that fake smile that never reached her icy blue eyes. The ticket, $1,000 fine for unauthorized recreational water use in a so-called restricted zone. I'm standing there dripping wet, staring at the paper in disbelief. "Ma'am, this is my lake. I built this dock myself back when you were still living out in California." I told her, "What would you do if someone tried to claim control over water that had always been yours?" "My name's Garrett. 3 years ago, I lost my wife, Sarah, after 22 years of marriage. Losing her was like having half my soul torn away. The grief was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't see a future without her. So I did what any broken man might do. I disappeared into solitude. Well, not exactly disappeared. I moved onto my grandfather's old property in rural North Carolina, 4 acres and a spring-fed lake that had been in our family since the early 50s. My grandfather, fresh home from the Korean War, built the original cabin with his own 2 hands. That lake had been his therapy, and it became mine, too. The place is heaven on earth. Crystal clear water bubbling up from underground springs, pine trees standing like sentinels all around, their scent fresh as Christmas morning. Mornings were magical, a mist rising like spirits off the lake, loons echoing across the water, trout breaking the surface. I'd sit on the dock with coffee in Sarah's favorite chipped mug, feeling some measure of peace. After 20 years working as municipal finance director, catching shady contractors and learning how obscure laws were often abused, I thought I'd left bureaucracy behind when I retired. The lake was my sanctuary, my reason to keep going. But then came Karen, a storm in designer heels, determined to bend nature to her will. It started when a developer bought the old logging road bordering my property. Soon bulldozers roared, 100-year-old oaks toppled, and the quiet mornings I treasured gave way to the stench of diesel and the racket of chainsaws. Within 2 years, nearly 50 oversized houses crowded the edge of the woods, the so-called luxury lake estates. Except, of course, the only real lake view was mine. Imagine paying nearly $1 million just to look out your kitchen window at someone else's water. That's when Karen rolled in, white BMW, California plates, and an ego that didn't fit inside county lines. Everything about her screamed excess, expensive highlights, designer handbags, that polished smile she wielded like a weapon. Within months, she'd secured the title of HOA president and launched her crusade to civilize us country folk. At first, it was thinly veiled neighborly gestures. She'd strut across my gravel drive in stilettos, sounding like a tap dancer fighting for balance, bearing store-bought cookies and fake compliments about how my cabin had rustic charm. But when I turned down her lowball offer to buy my land, her mask slipped. The harassment campaign began. First, she filed complaints about my dock. I showed the county my permits a years older than her subdivision. Next, she claimed my trout were polluting the watershed. The inspector laughed, saying my lake was cleaner than the city's tap water. But she wasn't finished. Karen dug up a forgotten ordinance from the 1920s, some ancient rule about recreational water use. With her real estate buddies on the county board, she convinced them to amend it, making it retroactive. Suddenly, any body of water within 500 feet of a residential area required HOA approval for use. My family's lake, untouched for nearly 70 years, was suddenly under her authority. A woman who hadn't even lived here 2 years was trying to control what my grandfather had built with his bare hands. And then she made her biggest mistake. She called the sheriff on me, a grieving widower, for daring to swim in my own lake. Karen made the mistake of thinking she could break a man who was already fighting to heal in his own backyard. Big mistake. A couple of weeks after that ridiculous swimming citation, I was on my porch enjoying my morning coffee when I heard the unmistakable crunch of multiple cars rolling up my gravel driveway. The fresh scent of pine was quickly drowned out by something less pleasant, the sour mix of cheap cologne and polyester sweat that follows petty hustlers wherever they go. Karen climbed out of her BMW, looking smug as ever, with reinforcements in tow. Behind her waddled a county inspector in a rumpled uniform. His name tag read Randy Morrison. He clutched his clipboard like it was some kind of holy relic, a nervous twitch making him smack it against his thigh every few seconds. "Mr. Henderson," Karen cooed with mock sweetness, "we've received a report that you're running a commercial fishing business here." I nearly spit coffee across the porch. "Commercial fishing, lady? I stock this lake so I can fish for myself." Randy puffed up his chest and put on his best imitation of authority. "Sir, unless you can provide a business license for this aquaculture facility, I'll have to issue fines of $500 per day until you're in compliance." I dealt with plenty of frauds in my municipal days, and Randy had the same energy as a shady car salesman trying to push a lemon with no engine. But instead of blowing up, I played it cool. I showed him my deed and permisa proof that my lake was strictly for personal use. He barely skimmed them. "The complaint says otherwise," he muttered. "Until you prove you're not running a business, this lake is shut down." That night, while Karen was probably sipping overpriced wine and celebrating her little victory, I dug out my old laptop. 20 years in municipal finance had taught me one thing: every grifter leaves a trail. It didn't take long. First bombshell: Randy's inspector's license had expired 2 years earlier. He wasn't even legally allowed to inspect a lemonade stand, much less my property. I remembered similar scams from my county days and knew exactly how to handle it. I screenshotted his expired credentials, filed a complaint with the state licensing board, and started pulling records. Turns out, Randy had been conducting bogus inspections across 3 counties. Not sloppy paperwork, a systematic fraud. When the board finally came down on him, I heard through the courthouse grapevine that he had a full-blown meltdown and begged Karen to make it all disappear. Her brilliant solution: go on the offensive. A few days later, I opened my mailbox to find a bill. The Lakeside Luxury Estates HOA was demanding $500 a month in liability insurance for dangerous water activities. They'd even backdated it 6 months, claiming I owed $3,000. Karen was now trying to charge me rent to swim in the lake my grandfather dug with a borrowed bulldozer back in 1952. I had to admit the audacity was impressive. But while Randy was staring down $10,000 in fines and possible criminal charges, I was busy arming myself with legal ammunition. I remembered the landmark Supreme Court Casey Lucas v. South Carolina Coastal Council. The ruling was clear. The government can't strip a property owner of all legal use of their land without compensation. Translation: they couldn't force me to pay for simply existing on my own property. So I filed for an injunction in county court to freeze Karen's little shakedown. And because experience told me never to trust people like her, I also hired a surveyor to double-check my property lines. Best decision I ever made. The results were pure gold. Karen's shiny new subdivision was illegally encroaching 15 feet onto state forest land. 3 houses, including one owned by her cousin Daniel, were technically trespassing on public property. I dropped an anonymous tip to the state forestry department. Within a week, 3 homeowners were slapped with violation notices. Each one faced fines up to $50,000 per house, plus possible demolition. Suddenly, Karen's $3,000 insurance bill looked laughable. The very next morning, she came storming across my yard like an invading army, face red as a stop sign, screaming about harassment, stomping like a woman possessed. If General Sherman had marched through Georgia in heels and a pantsuit, it might have looked something like that. Karen's tantrum reached operatic levels, screaming about how I was ruining property values, loud enough to send the loons scattering and probably wake the ancestors in the cemetery 3 towns over. "You think you are clever?" she screeched, jabbing a manicured finger at me. "I'm going to sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I didn't even flinch. Instead, I handed her the freshly printed court documents for my injunction hearing. "See you in court, Karen. Bring your checkbook and a real attorney. You'll need both." The look on her face was priceless. She opened and closed her mouth like one of my trout flopping on the dock for air. The sound of her heels clattering away on gravel was sweeter than any bird call I'd ever heard. But if Karen had learned anything from the Randy fiasco, she didn't show it. 2 weeks later, she upped the game with what she clearly thought was psychological warfare. Translation: she called the local news. I was tossing feed to my trout one morning. Yes, they had a schedule. Don't judge ya when the unmistakable rumble of a news van came up my drive. The tires crackled over the gravel like bubble wrap made of stone. Out stepped reporter Megan Torres, followed by a cameraman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. And, of course, Karen strutted out of her BMW in what I can only describe as her concerned citizen costume, conservative blazer, toned-down makeup, and an expression like she was seconds from weeping over endangered property values. "Mr. Henderson," Megan began, walking toward me with polished confidence. "We're here about concerns that your lake activities are threatening the community's water supply." Behind her, Karen had staged a lineup of 3 neighbors with the blank, overly concerned expressions you usually see in pharmaceutical ads right before they start rattling off side effects. I set down the fish food and kept my tone calm. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what concerns you're referring to." Then the rapid-fire questions came. Did I know about the environmental dangers? Didn't I care about children's safety? What about plummeting property values? Clearly Karen had prepped the reporter with every leading question in the book, painting me as some kind of eco-villain. But here's the thing: 20 years of public meetings had taught me how to stay composed when someone tried to set you up. Instead of getting rattled, I invited them to test my lake water right there. Then, without breaking eye contact with the camera, I dipped a glass straight from the lake and drank it. Karen's face was pure gold, like someone realizing they'd brought a squirt gun to a tank fight. "This water has been tested 3 separate times this year by County Environmental Services," I explained, pulling out a folder thicker than a dictionary. "It's cleaner than most tap water in the county. Here you take a look at the reports." I handed Megan copies of everything: inspection reports proving pristine water quality, property deeds stretching back to 1892, current permits, even photographs of Karen's subdivision spilling onto state forest land. The tone of the interview shifted instantly. Megan's questions turned sharper but toward Karen. Why didn't her claims match the evidence? Did she have any proof at all? Karen wilted under the scrutiny. The October breeze was cool, but sweat trickled down her temple as her eye twitched, a tell I recognized from years of catching contractors in lies. She stammered about potential risks and community concerns, but she had nothing concrete. That's when I decided to add fuel to the fire. "Megan, you may want to check into Mrs. Whitmore's history in her previous neighborhoods. California, Arizona broken bar patterns have a way of repeating themselves when you follow the paper trail." Karen's skin went pale beneath her carefully applied foundation. She knew I'd done my homework. The interview wrapped up with her demanding equal airtime for the host side. Megan agreed to a follow-up. Karen thought it was her chance at redemption, but it turned out to be her second colossal mistake. See, the station manager was none other than Jim Patterson, a man I'd worked with on government transparency projects back in my municipal days. Small world, especially when your reputation is built on honesty and catching fraud. The follow-up segment aired a week later. Megan presented both sides, but the contrast was laughable. Karen fumbled through contradictions, got defensive at basic questions, and even admitted she'd never once tested the subdivision's well water, the very thing she'd claimed to be defending. Meanwhile, I stayed calm, presented clear facts, and backed every statement with documents. The optics couldn't have been clearer. While Karen flailed and contradicted herself on camera, I sat calm and steady, binders of proof stacked beside me like some kind of bureaucratic superhero. The fallout was immediate. My voicemail overflowed with messages from neighbors, so many thanking me for standing up to the HOA bully they'd all been too afraid to challenge. Some admitted they'd kept quiet for years, worried about fines or nitpicky violations if they spoke out. But Karen wasn't finished. Humiliated on the evening news and with questions about her past now swirling, she decided to take things nuclear. The following Monday, a county health inspector showed up at my cabin. Karen had filed yet another complaint, this time claiming my septic system was leaking into the lake and polluting the watershed. She demanded that all lake use be shut down pending a full environmental review. The Inspector Marcusa was the real deal. Credentials, professionalism, the whole package. Instead of bristling, I welcomed him, even offered him coffee while he did his job. And it didn't take long for the truth to surface. Marcus found that my cabin didn't even have a traditional septic system. I'd installed a state-of-the-art composting setup, a completely clean, zero discharge into the lake. He actually seemed impressed. "This is an eco-friendly showcase," he said, snapping photos. "Mind if I get your contractor's info? I know people who'd want this." Karen's claim was dismissed outright as malicious and frivolous, words I knew would be useful later in court. The victory was sweet, but I had a sinking feeling Karen was just getting warmed up. If she had an ounce of sense, she would have backed down after that. Instead, she doubled down like a gambler betting the mortgage on a losing hand. That Friday, I was out back splitting firewood, letting the steady rhythm of the axe clear my thoughts, when a delivery truck ground up my driveway. The driver handed me a certified letter thick enough to use as a doorstop. The return address made me laugh. Rutherford Associates, one of Charlotte's most expensive law firms. Karen had gone big. The letter demanded I cease all nuisance water activities that allegedly violated noise ordinances. According to their tortured logic, my swimming created excessive splashing sounds that disrupted neighboring peace. To avoid a lawsuit, they wanted $5,000 in mediation fees. I almost admired the creativity. Karen had officially reduced tyranny to its pettiest form of fining me for the sound of water splashing in a lake I owned. But the letter was just the opening act. Over the weekend, Karen escalated to surveillance tactics. Home members drove past my property at a crawl, snapping photos and recording video. Passive-aggressive notes appeared on my truck windshield, reminding me to respect community standards and be a good neighbor. And then came the bureaucratic blitz. Monday brought a building inspector. Tuesday, the fire marshal. Wednesday, the tax assessor. All triggered by anonymous complaints. None of them found anything serious, but that wasn't the point. I knew the tactic well. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The goal wasn't to catch me breaking rules, it was to bury me in endless harassment until I gave up and moved out. But Karen had made the mistake of using a playbook I knew by heart. What she didn't count on was that I'd spent decades following money trails and digging through records. That weekend, I camped out in the basement of the county records office. The place smelled like dust and forgotten dreams. But what I uncovered was better than Christmas morning. First discovery: Karen's entire subdivision had been built under an emergency wetlands permit. That permit required a 25-foot buffer from all natural water sources. 3 homes, including Karen's own gleaming mansion, sat squarely inside that buffer zone. The penalty? Fines of up to $10,000 per day and, in severe cases, mandatory demolition. But that wasn't even the best part. Under North Carolina law, homeowners can request access to HOA financial statements. I did exactly that, and the documents made Randy's expired inspector license look like a parking ticket. Karen had been treating HOA funds like her personal piggy bank. No competitive bidding for contracts, even though state law required it for anything over $10,000. Her husband Rick's landscaping company pocketed $45,000 a year for exclusive maintenance. Pool care went to her cousin Danny at a cushy $28,000 annually. Legal fees, payments to her personal attorney for issues unrelated to the HOA. I'd seen this pattern before in municipal audits, a carefully woven scheme of self-dealing and mismanagement. And once you document it, it's hard for the guilty party to wiggle free. Karen had left behind a paper trail wider than Interstate 85, and while I was busy piecing it all together, she tried one more desperate stunt. She filed for a temporary restraining order against me, accusing me of stalking home members, harassing them, and even threatening violence during our property dispute. The sheriff's deputies handed me the papers while I was feeding trout at the dock, as if I were some criminal mastermind instead of a guy tossing fish pellets. I didn't waste time. I hired Patricia, an attorney with a razor-sharp reputation for dismantling corrupt HOA boards. She was known for leaving smug board presidents trembling before noon. After reviewing my stack of documentation, she gave me a slow smile, the kind that makes opposing counsel rethink their career. "Garrett, she said, spreading the evidence out like a battle plan. "Karen's about to learn why you don't bring a knife to a gunfight." The hearing itself played out like a courtroom drama. Karen strutted in with 3 HOA allies dressed in their best Sunday clothes, each practicing their concerned citizen faces. I arrived carrying a binder so thick it could double as a boat anchor. Judge Margaret Yates, 30 years on the bench and allergic to nonsense, presided. She flipped through our submissions with the precision of a forensic accountant. One by one, Karen's witnesses unraveled, contradicting each other under the simplest questioning. My security cameras told the real story. It wasn't me doing the harassing. When Karen's lawyer tried to introduce evidence of my threatening behavior, Patricia calmly produced audio recordings of every single interaction. Karen's voice on tape sounded increasingly erratic, while mine stayed calm, polite, and professional. The judge wasn't impressed. She denied Karen's request, slapped a temporary protective order against her instead, ordered the HOA to stop the surveillance and trespassing, and even awarded me $2,500 in legal fees. Before adjourning, she warned Karen about potential perjury charges if she kept lying under oath. The meltdown that followed was worthy of its own news segment, and it got one. In the courthouse parking lot, Karen screamed about corruption and claimed I was destroying the community. She carried on loud enough to wake half the county. A local reporter caught it all, and the next morning's paper ran a headline that read, "HOA President's Courtroom Tantrum." That night, something shifted. A few subdivision residents quietly approached me, admitting Karen had made their lives miserable too. Pool parties shut down for noise violations, garden gnomes banned as aesthetic hazards, guests ticketed if they stayed more than 4 hours. A few neighbors whispered about starting a recall petition. For the first time, Karen's power didn't seem untouchable, but Patricia had uncovered something even bigger. While combing through the original HOA charter, she spotted a clause buried deep in the legal language. Any property owner within 1,000 feet of the subdivision could petition to join as a voting member. My lake cabin qualified, and because my parcel was the largest, I'd hold 30% of the voting shares. In her obsession with controlling me, Karen had overlooked the one fact that gave me the power to control her. The irony was almost too perfect. Then came the real bombshell. Patricia, digging into the subdivision's plat maps, called me at 6 in the morning with the kind of excitement lawyers usually reserve for ironclad smoking guns. "Garrett, get down here immediately," she said. "Karen's entire development is built on a house of cards and it's about to collapse." I drove through the morning mist, the smell of pine and damp earth mixing with the weight of anticipation. When I walked into Patricia's office, she already had coffee brewing and documents spread across the table like a detective unraveling a cold case. The revelation stopped me cold. The entire subdivision violated the county's original master plan. That land was zoned for low-density rural use, 16 homes, max, on 95 acres. Karen's development had 47 mansions crammed in, more than triple the allowed density. And the loophole they'd used to justify it, a temporary emergency variance passed after Hurricane Florence in 2019 to address the housing crisis. That temporary clause was the detail everyone had overlooked until now. The so-called emergency housing provisions had a hidden fuse. They automatically expired after 5 years unless renewed by the county commission. Karen's precious variance was said to burn out on December 15, barely 6 months away. If it lapsed, 31 houses would be in violation, leaving only 16 legally allowed to stand. The rest, by law, could be ordered demolished. For those homeowners, it wouldn't just be a setback, it would be financial Armageddon. Patricia pulled up the HOA's financial spreadsheets on her laptop and walked me through the math. Right now, assessments are based on 47 homes paying $320 each month. Cut that down to 16 houses, and those families would be on the hook for the same budget, meaning nearly $1,000 per month, per house. She shook her head. They're sitting on a ticking financial bomb, and most don't even know it. Then came the real kicker. Buried in the discovery files was proof Karen had known about the expiration all along. She'd been quietly lobbying commissioners to extend the variance while distracting everyone else with her harassment crusade against me. That was her fatal mistake. I had spent years in municipal finance and worked alongside many of those same commissioners. They remembered me as the stickler who followed rules to the letter and flagged irregularities before they blew up into scandals. Commissioner Martinez himself once called me that man with the lake who sets the standard for responsible rural development. Now contrast that with Karen's courtroom tantrum and endless smear campaigns. Her credibility with the county was dead on arrival. Renewal chances, next to zero. Patricia wasn't finished. She slid the HOA charter across the table and pointed to a section that made my coffee taste better with every word. Membership wasn't limited to subdivision lot owners. It extended to any property within a 100-foot buffer of the boundary. My parcel sat inside the line by 23 feet. That meant I had the legal right to join the HOA as a full voting member. And voting power wasn't one person, one vote. It was proportional based on property size and assessed value. My 4-acre lakefront parcel, valued at $485,000, carried nearly a third of the weight. With that block alone, I would control 31% of every HOA decision. Patricia leaned back and explained the possibilities. You could block assessment hikes, call special elections, force access to every financial record, even propose amendments to the charter itself, all with your single voting block. The irony was almost poetic. Karen had spent months trying to dictate what I could do with my land. Now I had the power to dictate hers. But staring at those papers, I felt a shift. I didn't want scorched earth. Most of the residents weren't villains, they were victims of Karen's obsession, just like me. The real goal wasn't vengeance, it was repair. Get rid of Karen, stabilize the finances, and turn the HOA into something that actually served people instead of feeding one woman's power addiction. Word must have leaked, because Karen suddenly called an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday, citing vague financial issues. The notice was rushed out with barely any lead time, her usual trick to keep turnout low and control the narrative. That gave me 72 hours, 3 days to file my membership application, rally the disillusioned residents, and build enough support to challenge her directly. Patricia drafted paperwork non-stop while I began calling every neighbor who had quietly celebrated my courthouse win. The stakes were clear. Whoever won on Saturday would control not just the HOA, but the financial future of 47 families. Janet Morrison was my first call, a retired school teacher on Maple Court. She had been keeping a meticulous record of Karen's antics for 2 years. Karen once fined her $200 for a bird bath. Apparently, concrete doves weren't in harmony with the architectural vision of suburban paradise. When Janet picked up the phone, her voice carried decades of pent-up frustration. "Mr. Henderson, I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to that woman. Tell me what you need." She wasn't exaggerating, as she had an entire spiral notebook organized like a grade book, packed with violations, fines, intimidation attempts, and minutes from board meetings where dissent was silenced. Next on the list was Bob Martinez, an accountant from Oak Ridge Drive who had made the fatal error of asking too many questions about HOA finances. Bob was the type who couldn't look at a budget without spotting the missing decimals. That made him dangerous in Karen's world because he noticed when the numbers didn't add up. Creative accounting was how Bob put it when we met at the local diner, the place still thick with the scent of bacon and black coffee. He leaned across the table, spreadsheets in hand. "I've been asking to see the actual invoices for months. Karen keeps saying it's all proprietary, but just this year alone, I've uncovered $43,000 that doesn't add up." The evidence was damning. Landscaping bills that didn't match the work done, equipment supposedly purchased but never delivered, legal fees for matters that had nothing to do with the HOA. Bob's records laid out a trail of financial misconduct that no honest treasurer could explain away. Our third ally was Lisa Park, a civil engineer who had designed the subdivision's original drainage system before Karen illegally altered it. Lisa carried the calm authority of someone used to building things that have to stand up in the real world. "Karen cut my specifications to save a buck," she explained during a late-night planning session at my cabin. "Her changes dump stormwater straight toward your lake. If the state environmental agency investigates, they could shut the entire neighborhood down." Lisa wasn't just another disgruntled resident. She was technical expert with credentials and credibility, and exactly what we needed to balance Karen's emotional grandstanding. By Friday night, my kitchen table looked more like a war room. Patricia had assembled 3 thick binders, each one packed with exhibits, organized so every piece of evidence landed with precision. Our plan was straightforward but devastating: expose Karen's financial fraud, reveal the ticking clock on the zoning variance, and present my home membership application as the only viable solution. Bob would present the numbers in a way no homeowner could ignore. $45,000 paid to Rick's landscaping company for work worth less than half. $28,000 billed for pool maintenance that was supposed to be daily but was actually performed weekly. Legal fees quietly covering Karen's divorce attorney paid with home money. Janet would share her meticulous documentation of residents harassed and fined over petty violations. Lisa would walk through the environmental risks Karen's shortcuts had created. From my years in municipal finance, I knew statistics didn't win hearts as stories did. People needed to feel the pattern, how every violation, every bogus fine, every inflated invoice all pointed back to one truth: the Karen's obsession with consolidating power and draining the community's wallet. Patricia drilled us on procedure. North Carolina law allowed any member with proof of mismanagement to call an emergency election. My membership gave me that right, and with my 31% voting share, Karen's allies couldn't shut us down. We even planned for her tricks. If she tried to adjourn early, Patricia would cite the bylaws. If she claimed I wasn't a member, my application paperwork made it official. If she called the police, we were on public property, armed with legally obtained documents. Saturday morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of October air that carries promise. We met at my cabin at 7, 3 hours before the showdown. The smell of bacon mixed with nerves as we reviewed everything one last time. Janet admitted she was anxious but resolute. She has to be stopped before she destroys this neighborhood completely. Bob was practically buzzing. Numbers don't lie, and Karen's been lying through numbers for years. Lisa unrolled maps and diagrams, showing exactly where runoff now threaten the lake. Once they see the waste and the risks, they'll understand why fees keep climbing. For the first time in years, I felt calm. We weren't just defending anymore, we were taking the fight to her, with evidence she couldn't bury. Patricia handed out copies of the binders and reminded us of the likely fireworks, personal insults, fake accusations, cheap theatrics. The key, she said, was to stay grounded in facts and let Karen's behavior betray her. By 9:30, we loaded the evidence into Bob's van and headed to the community center. Anticipation was thick in the air, carrying the quiet satisfaction of people who had done their homework. Karen's grip on power was about to break, and the receipts were going to do it. The only question was whether she'd step down quietly at Broken Bar or drag the entire subdivision into chaos with her. And in the days leading up to that morning, it became clear which path she'd choose. Cornered and furious, Karen lashed out like an animal with a law degree and a social media account. It began Friday night with a late text to Janet, spreading lies about HOA business as grounds for defamation. "Consider this your only warning." Sent at 11:47 p.m., it read like the product of insomnia mixed with desperation. Monday morning, she targeted Bob. She called his accounting firm, accusing him of misusing company time and resources to harass community volunteers. But the centerpiece of her smear campaign was aimed at Lisa. Karen contacted the state engineering board, filing a complaint against her professional license. Karen's retaliation reached a new low when she filed a complaint against Lisa with the state engineering board, accusing her of professional misconduct simply because Lisa had dared to expose Karen's unpermitted drainage changes. What started as 3 residents asking questions about their community had now escalated into full-blown personal and professional attacks. But Karen wasn't finished. She submitted another police report, this time claiming I had threatened her during our old property line dispute. What she conveniently forgot was that the entire interaction had been captured by my security cameras. The same Deputy Martinez who had once cited me for swimming took her statement, and even he noted her erratic behavior and lack of evidence. Saturday morning, I arrived at the community center early only to find a crooked, handwritten sign taped to the door: "Meeting relocated to 847 Maple Court due to security concerns." Karen had moved an home meeting for nearly 50 households into her 2-car garage, a space that might fit 15 people if they all skipped breakfast for a month. The place reeked of motor oil and desperation. Patricia immediately challenged the move, pointing to the bylaws requiring adequate space for all members. Karen countered with some nonsense about security threats justifying limited attendance. By the time residents arrived and found themselves standing in the driveway, shivering in the October air and straining to hear, the mood began to turn. Nothing reveals the absurdity of petty dictatorship like forcing your neighbors to freeze outside because you're terrified of transparency. When I presented my membership application, Karen snapped, "You don't even live here, you can't tell us what to do," she screamed. The expression on her face when Patricia calmly explained my legal right to join under the original charter was unforgettably like someone realizing they'd just stepped on a landmine. Rick, her husband, and Danny, her cousin, finally saw what my 31% voting share meant. Their little fiefdom was crumbling. Karen's unraveling accelerated from there. She accused me of forging documents, bribing county officials, and masterminding a conspiracy that somehow included county commissioners, the state forestry department, and, judging by her tone, probably the Illuminati. Even her staunchest allies shuffled uncomfortably, their loyalty shaken by the spectacle of a president sounding more like a street corner conspiracy theorist than a community leader. Patricia invoked Article 12 of the HOA bylaws, which allowed members to force a vote on relocating when meeting space was inadequate. I'd seen this tactic before in city governmental leaders trying to muzzle public participation by manipulating logistics. The solution was always the same: put it to a vote. With 23 residents present, the results were decisive. 18 voted to move back to the community center, 5 voted number. Karen flat out refused to accept the outcome, insisting only official board members could call meetings. Patricia coolly cited state law proving otherwise, pointing out that members had the right to override board decisions when their rights were at stake. That's when Karen called the police. Deputy Martinez showed up looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. When Karen demanded he start making arrests for illegal assembly, he sighed and explained it was a civil issue and suggested everyone act like adults. The crowd didn't need to be told twice. We moved to the community center, where Karen's obstruction tactics had no teeth. 31 residents attended, the largest turnout in the subdivision's history. The energy in the room felt electrical, like a powder keg waiting for the spark. Karen arrived 20 minutes late, dragging her attorney onto the scene via speakerphone, claiming the meeting was invalid because of the relocation. But residents weren't buying it. They were there for answers about their community's money and governance, not to watch their president unravel in public. I sat quietly, taking notes while Karen dug herself deeper with each objection. Questions began flying from the audience about landscaping contracts, pool maintenance costs, and unexplained legal fees. Her answers grew evasive, contradictory, and more desperate by the minute. Then Bob stood and asked about the $45,000 landscaping contract. Karen declared it was proprietary information that couldn't be shared publicly. Bob coolly presented public records showing the overbilling. Across the room, Rick began sweating like a man watching his gravy train grind to a halt. Cornered, Karen lashed out with the lowest blow of all. She launched into a personal attack on me, dredging up Sarah's death, insinuating that I was unstable, dangerous, even a threat to children and property values. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that carries judgment heavier than words. Even her closest supporters looked appalled that she would weaponize a widower's grief for political gain. That's when Janet rose to her feet, her voice trembling with fury. "Karen, you fined me $200 for a bird bath, a broken bar. Since when did we start treating our neighbors like enemies?" Janet's words cracked the tension wide open. One by one, residents began sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation at Karen's hands. Years of bottled-up frustration came flooding out like water bursting through a dam. Karen tried to shut things down, declaring the meeting adjourned, but no one budged. After years of heavy-handed rule, people had finally tasted real democracy, and they weren't about to give it up. I stepped to the podium with my binders of documentation. Karen, red-faced and desperate, shouted, "I won't let you destroy this community." I met her glare with a calm voice. "I'm not here to destroy it, I'm here to save it." The battle lines were drawn. In the week between the infamous garage debacle and the final showdown, Karen went completely off the rails. Her behavior became scorched earth, the kind of desperation Napoleon himself might have admired during his retreat from Moscow. She hired a shady ex-cop named Wadia, an investigator who drove a dented sedan and wore too much cologne that smelled like cigarette smoke and bad choices. Wade followed me around town, snapping photos through my cabin windows, and even approached my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, fishing for gossip about my mental health and daily habits. Meanwhile, Karen escalated her smear campaign online. She spun up fake profiles, spreading lies that I was planning to start a commercial fishing operation that would tank property values. She even posted doctored screenshots of threatening messages, complete with laughable spelling errors to make them seem authentic. The lowest blow came when she claimed Sarah hadn't died from cancer, but from suicide, and that I had covered it up to protect myself. It was an appalling, cruel fabrication, even by Karen's twisted standards. Exploiting my wife's death for political leverage was beyond vile. But while Karen torched her own credibility with increasingly unhinged stunts, I was quietly gathering the evidence that would end her reign once and for all. Bob Martinez uncovered the smoking gun, bank records showing Karen had siphoned $85,000 from the HOA's reserve fund allegedly for emergency roof repairs at the community center. But the very same day that money vanished, Karen closed on a condo in Myrtle Beach, Unit 247, Beach Breeze condominiums. Her own social media betrayed her, with photos of her celebrating at the beach that same weekend, while residents believed their fees were paying for infrastructure improvements. It was breathtakingly bold to like robbing a bank and then posting vacation selfies with the stolen cash. Patricia had been working in the background, too. She'd connected with the county prosecutor, who was building a criminal case. Under North Carolina law, every fraudulent transaction carried a potential sentence of 2 to 10 years. This wasn't just about removing Karen from office anymore. She was staring down prison time. Meanwhile, Wade overplayed his hand. One evening, Mrs. Patterson called the sheriff after catching him lurking on her property, trying to peer through her windows. Deputies arrested him for intimidation and illegal surveillance. To save himself, Wade immediately flipped on Karen, telling investigators he'd been hired directly by the HOA president to dig up dirt on me. That admission went into an official report. Of Karen's intimidation campaign was now part of the criminal record. By Thursday, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. My own investigator, a professional firm that didn't reek of stale smoky, handed me a comprehensive dossier on Karen. Turns out, she'd pulled the exact same scam in 3 different states, California, Arizona, and Florida. The playbook was always identical: a move into a community, seize control of the HOA, bleed the finances dry, create chaos, and skip town before prosecution could catch up. 2 criminal cases were still open from those stunts, and she'd left behind a civil judgment of $127,000 that had never been paid. This wasn't just a difficult neighbor. Karen was a serial fraudster with a long track record of destruction. The morning of the final confrontation, I spotted a U-Haul hitched to her BMW. She clearly intended to vanish as soon as the meeting ended, probably with whatever money she could grab on the way out. The community center overflowed with people. 67 residents packed into the hall, the largest turnout anyone could remember. The air buzzed with anticipation, as if the whole neighborhood knew this night would change everything. Channel 7's Megan Torres had slipped in with her camera crew, tipped off about the HOA scandal, while County Prosecutor Williams and Detective Hayes sat quietly in the back row, ready to act the moment Karen incriminated herself. Outside, Deputy Martinez stood watch, well aware of Karen's history of explosive meltdowns when cornered. Karen swept into the room adorned in flashy new jewelry, almost certainly paid for with HOA funds. She carried herself with the brittle confidence of a pyramid scheme leader seconds before collapse. Noticeably absent was her husband Rick, who, word had it, had already bolted to Oklahoma with whatever cash they could salvage. From the start, Karen tried to keep control, restricting discussion, rushing through the agenda, and citing vague security concerns. But when I rose to speak under Robert's Rules of Order, Patricia stood beside me, holding our finalized paperwork. The review period expired yesterday, she declared firmly. Mr. Henderson is now an official home member with a 31% voting share. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face drained of color. Her grip on power had just shattered in front of the community she once ruled. I approached the podium with 3 thick binders of evidence, steady and composed from 2 decades of experience in public meetings. I'd like to present some financial irregularities for board review, I said evenly. You can't discuss confidential home matters. Karen shrieked, her voice sharp and panicked. I turned deliberately toward the news camera. Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential, it's criminal. A ripple of approval swept through the crowd. Justice was finally within reach. Bob Martinez stepped forward, projecting spreadsheets onto the screen. His accountant's precision sliced through Karen's financial fog like a searchlight cutting through mist. Here we have the Whitmore landscaping contract, he began. Build, $67,000. Actual value of work, $23,000. That's a consistent pattern of inflated billing. Gasps followed. He clicked to the next slide. Pool maintenance charged daily, but only performed weekly. Legal facet community funds used to pay Mrs. Whitmore's personal divorce attorney. Karen exploded, lunging at Bob's laptop like a feral animal, screeching that everything was fabricated. Her hysterics only reinforced her guilt. Then came the damning slide, security footage and bank records showing direct transfers from HOA accounts to her personal bank. The knockout blow appeared on screen, $85,000 withdrawn for emergency roof repairs, followed by closing documents for her Myrtle Beach condo. The crowd erupted when her own vacation photos from that weekend appeared, smiling on the beach while residents thought their fees were repairing infrastructure. I advanced the slides again. And now, ladies and gentlemen, meet the real Karen Whitmore, also known as Karen Johnson, a serial community predator. The room fell into stunned silence. Then came the shocked whispers as residents read the report. 3 other neighborhoods destroyed by the same scheme, pending charges in California for fraud and grand theft, and a civil judgment in Arizona for nearly $90,000 that she'd never repaid. Karen snapped. Her meltdown was complete. She shrieked that it was all a conspiracy, her supporters quietly slipping toward the exits. She grabbed the microphone, her voice cracking with desperation. This man is dangerous. He threatened to poison our water supply. He stalks children. Her accusations grew wilder, more absurd by the second. As if to seal her fate, she pulled out a forged mental health evaluation with a fake doctor's license number. It was so laughably bad that several residents chuckled openly. That's when Prosecutor Williams rose to his feet, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Prosecutor Williams. You are under investigation for embezzling $127,000 from your neighbors. The Channel 7 crew surged forward, cameras capturing every word. Karen froze, realizing she had just perjured herself and hurled false accusations all live on television. Her face cycled through shades of red, white, and green, like a broken traffic light. Karen's face twisted in panic as she shrieked, "This is illegal surveillance." She lunged toward the news crew, heels slipping against the polished floor with a squeal that almost drew laughter, if not for the gravity of the moment. Detective Hayes stepped in, calm and firm, cuffing her wrists while reciting her rights. She fought every word, screaming about conspiracies and witch hunts, but the charges echoed clearly for everyone present: embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Each accusation carried weight, and the evidence stacked against her left no room for doubt. The community center was silent as Karen was led out in handcuffs, still spitting threats over her shoulder. Officers searched the waiting U-Haul and quickly uncovered thousands of dollars worth of stolen HOA property, commercial lawn equipment, pool supplies, even items residents had reported missing months before. When the last police car disappeared into the night, the room felt hollow, as if the chaos had drained every sound from it. I broke the silence. "I never wanted to tear this community apart," I said, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I wanted to save it." A slow clap began with Janet Morrison, then grew until the entire room erupted in applause. Some residents cried, others embraced. Years of bottled-up frustration spilled out as relief. It was as if a dam had burst. We wasted no time. I proposed an emergency vote to strip Karen of all HOA authority. and it passed unanimously. Her proxy votes now worthless. Within minutes, a temporary board was chosen, Bob as treasurer, Janet as secretary, and Lisa Park as president. When asked if I wanted a role, I shook my head with a smile. I'd rather advise. My lake's always open for fishing. Let's be neighbors again, not enemies. For the first time in years, people lingered after the meeting, and not to argue, but to talk like friends. The victory was sweet, not just because Karen's tyranny had ended, but because the community itself had found its voice again. Her downfall wasn't just about evidence and receipts, it was about people finally standing together. 6 months later, I sat on my dock watching kids learn to fish while parents chatted easily nearby. The smell of grilled burgers from our first Lake Day festival floated across the water, mixing with pine air and laughter the neighborhood hadn't heard in years. Karen had pled guilty, avoiding a drawn-out trial, and received 4 years in state prison. The asset forfeiture process clawed back most of the stolen funds, including her prized beach condo, seized almost as quickly as she'd bought it. Rick, extradited from Oklahoma, faced 18 months for conspiracy. Randy, the bogus inspector, got probation and a permanent ban from public contracts. Meanwhile, the new board launched what we called the Transparency Revolution. Monthly financials were posted online for all to see, and competitive bidding was mandatory for every project. From that point on, every contract over $1,000 required open bidding, and quarterly town halls replaced Karen's secretive, closed-door board sessions. One by one, we dismantled her oppressive rules, reshaping the HOA Covenant into something it was always meant to be: guidelines for cooperation, not weapons of harassment. The looming zoning disaster that threatened 31 homes was resolved through teamwork and honest discussion. Using my background in municipal work, I helped guide the variance renewal process with the county, ensuring a plan that both preserved the environment and protected property values. In the end, our community earned permanent grandfather status, and 15 houses were relocated at the developer's expense to meet environmental codes. My lake became the centerpiece of this reborn neighborhood. We named it Sarah's Sanctuary after my late wife. It now hosts kids' fishing lessons, shared canoe racks, and evening swims for anyone in need of peace as much as I once was. The dock, originally built in 1952, was expanded so the entire community could enjoy it. Hearing children's laughter ripple across the water is something I know would have made Sarah proud. The impact stretched far beyond our subdivision. Megan Torres' investigative series earned a regional Emmy, and the story went viral under the headline, "How One Man Saved His Community from an HOA Tyrant." That visibility led me to testify before the state legislature, helping draft what's now known as Karen's Law, a bill requiring every HOA in the state to undergo annual independent audits and maintain public financial records. Other neighborhoods soon reached out for help, and I realized I had stumbled into a new purpose. After 2 decades in municipal finance, I never expected my experience would be used to help everyday people push back against many dictators who treated property ownership like medieval fiefdoms. Financially, the turnaround was even better than we hoped. Thanks to asset recovery, insurance claims, and the seizure of Karen's stolen property, the HOA came out ahead. Monthly dues dropped to $188, lower than they'd been before Karen took power, and the reserve fund is stronger than ever. Property values rose 12% once her grip was broken, proving that cooperation and transparency do far more for real estate than authoritarianism ever could. For me personally, the lake that carried me through grief became something much greater, a living symbol of community renewal. The pain of losing Sarah will never disappear, but turning that pain into something that strengthens others has given my life new meaning. Just last week, I got a call from a homeowner in Tennessee, a disabled veteran fighting an HOA president who was blocking his wheelchair ramps. His voice trembled with a mix of frustration and hope. "I heard what you did in North Carolina," he said. "Can you help me?" I looked out over the lake as Janet taught her granddaughter how to cast a fishing line, while Bob flipped burgers for our monthly cookout. Neighbors laughed together, something we once thought impossible. "Tell me everything," I replied, already reaching for a notebook, because if this experience taught me anything, it's that small tyrants only succeed when good people stay silent. But when neighbors unite armed with facts, legal backing, and courage, justice doesn't just become possible, it becomes inevitable. The best answer to corrupt authority isn't revenge. It's building something stronger, fairer, and better together. And if you've lived through your own HOA nightmare, share it in the comments. I read every single one. Trust me, Karen wasn't even the worst story I've come across. If this story inspired you to stand up to the petty bullies in your life, make sure you subscribe, because next week, I'll be sharing the wild saga of an HOA president who tried to take away a veteran service dog. You won't believe how that one ends. Sometimes, the good guys really do win, especially when they've got receipts, the law on their side, and the conviction that communities deserve better than fear and intimidation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some trout to feed and a community to enjoy.